Off we go. Right, we are now live. We are recording. Hello, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to this evening's Careering Ahead. I'm Naomi Mellor, a veterinary surgeon for the BHA, podcaster and host, and I am joined this evening by Sulekha Varm, who is the head of Northwest Racing for the Jockey Club and the clerk of the course at Aintree. In case you didn't manage to join us previously, we spoke to Catch Bissett a couple of weeks ago, nice friend of Sulekha's, and she joined us from the yard in Scotland where she works, having recently won the Godolphin Stubborn Stable Staff Awards. We chatted a lot about working in racing and the stable staff issues that are around being in the industry. It was an amazing interview. She's really, really lovely. Those are available on YouTube, along with all the previous guests we've had, which have included, let's see if I can remember, Anne-Marie Phelps, Amy Murphy, who else have we chatted to? Claudia McDougall. There's lots and lots of people on there. So if you just go onto the Women in Racing website, go to the resources, all of our previous episodes are there and you can go back and watch them anytime you like. The chat box is open. The Q&A is open, so if you have any questions, do pop them in. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Sulekha is going to be with us for kind of the next 45 minutes to an hour, just discussing everything about her career. We're very fortunate to have her in advance of the Grand National, so we're really looking forward to chatting about that. But Sulekha, how did you get into horses in the first place? Like, what was your kind of growing up? Where did you grow up, and how did your kind of love of horses begin?
Most of my childhood was spent in Scotland, with a small stint in Liverpool. Although I was actually born in Cardiff, but we left there when I was 8 months old, and I'm sorry to say I've never been back, but I do really want to visit sometime. So the horses came about purely through pester power. Being an only child, I was very lucky in that my parents were very keen that I developed hobbies and met other kids, because it's quite easy to become isolated as an only child. So I was signed up for all sorts of things. I did dance classes, I did music, I did sport, but horses were the one thing that I really wanted to do. And mum and dad, I think, rather hoped that I would get on a horse once, fall off once, and that would be the end of it. But unfortunately for them, it wasn't. And I rode through most of my childhood, and was lucky enough to have my own pony from when I was about 10 years old. Went through pony club, had a go at most disciplines, bit of pony club games, show jumping, eventing, did all of it really, but not racing. That was the one thing that I never really got into until I was 18.
Funny, isn't it, actually, how pony racing is one of those things that, pony club is so accessible, and lots of kids who are fortunate enough to have ponies and do lots of riding would naturally gravitate towards pony club. But to me, just working at race meetings where we would have pony races, that it seems that a lot of the kids involved in pony racing are from racing families and racing backgrounds. And actually, I do wonder whether we just need to encourage a few more kids that are not from racing backgrounds but love ponies, love horses, to get into pony racing. And I think it'd be amazing to encourage some more kids into that.
Well, the great news is that work is already happening.
Yeah.
There's a few different schemes already in place to get kids who are particularly from perhaps inner city riding schools, but these are with pony racing are targeting children who can already ride. And want to get them into pony racing rather than losing them to another discipline or losing them out of equestrianism altogether. If they show an interest, the Pony Racing Authority are developing and in some areas already have a pathway ready that gets them to the racecourse with a pony that they can ride. So the good news is that those things are already happening.
Yeah, and Racing to School are doing amazing work in that sphere as well, aren't they? But
absolutely.
And so your parents weren't horsey at all. How did they kind of take to being horse-owning parents of a pony-loving child?
They were fantastic. Mum tried learning to ride for a while.
Okay.
She used to come to the riding school with me, but it just, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing, I think. But they both, used to drive me all over the place to competitions, drive me to the stables. I'd spend all weekend at the stables, school holidays. I'd get dropped off in the morning, and I'd be picked up in the evening, and my friends and I we'd play ponies all day. It was great. You'd building courses in the woods to go and jump, or just platting up your ponies, bathing them, all these things that, you know, for somebody who was lucky enough to be involved in that, it was great.
It's a dream childhood, isn't it?
It
So you went off to university to study classics. Was that sort of something that just came to you naturally, or how did you end up going down that route? And did you have any thought about a career in racing at that point?
No, not really.
Okay.
When I'd already applied to university and done my A levels, when I was asked if I would try out a placement at Lucinda Russell's yard.
Okay.
One of my friends from school, her mum worked in another school as a careers advisor and wanted to set up a placement in horse racing, but needed somebody to test it out. And it needed to be somebody who could ride. Well, her daughter Lauren, my friend, could ride, but she couldn't drive, and the only accommodation was somewhere where you needed a car. So the two of us were packed up and sent to Lucinda's for a week, and it was such an eye-opener for both of us. You know, neither of us had really had much exposure to racing at all, and it took some time, but by the end of the week we were riding up the gallops with everybody else, and we were doing a lot of it was sort of early in the season, so there was a lot of road work and a lot of slow work being done, but it was just amazing, and I was absolutely hooked. And actually Lauren stayed on and worked at Lucinda's for a while after that as well, before going on to become a physio.
And it is a slightly different kettle of fish, isn't it, when you've been around ponies and pleasure horses, you know, moving into working with thoroughbreds and actually just mastering the art of the thoroughbred. Isn't everybody can do it, but it does take a little bit of work, I think, doesn't it? And actually kind of understanding that it is a bit of a different ball game, particularly if you've been riding ponies and cobs or, you know, fairly quiet pleasure horses and moving on to rocket fueled race horses is a little bit different.
The ability to hold a racehorse at speed is a real skill. And I'll be very honest, it's not one I ever mastered. I was never a great work rider. I used to tend to ride the sort of easier, quieter types, and I certainly didn't do any schooling. Which I wasn't brave enough for that. But no, I think it's very easy to underestimate the skill it takes to ride a racehorse successfully at speed.
Yeah, and I always think that about handling and stud work as well, and dealing with colts and yearlings and those sorts of things as well. It's a very, very specialist skill, and I think there's wonderful training in the stud world to help people get into that. And actually, but acknowledging that differentiation of skill that you need, I think is important in order to encourage people and to acknowledge the wonderful skills that people do have in our industry, because it's easily overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the word skills, the word talent, it all goes with it, definitely.
Definitely. Lucinda definitely is an amazing encourager of young women. I was discussing this with Catch actually in the last interview, because she spent time there as well. Did you went back to Lucinda's later? Had you kept in touch with her and carried on riding out through uni, or did you kind of maintain that relationship, or was that when you went back there as a secretary, was that a bit of a chance encounter?
No, we kept in touch. As long as none of my lecturers are listening, I used to bunk off university when there was racing on at Hexham. From university in Durham, it was a couple of train rides in a taxi and you could get to Hexham. So I used to go and lead up for Lucinda occasionally when she had runners there, just to keep in touch. And then actually the working there full time, probably it was a chance encounter. I completed the BHA graduate program and did a placement at the Racing Post with every thought that I wanted to become a journalist. I'd always enjoyed writing. It was something that comes very naturally to me, and something that I do very much enjoy doing. But after being at the Racing Post, I thought I needed to go away and learn a bit more. I was offered a part-time job there when I finished my placement, but as everybody knows, living in London on a part-time job isn't necessarily an easy or a sensible thing to do unless you're well, I don't know, it depends what kind of life you want to live, but it certainly wasn't for me. So I was doing a bit of freelance writing while applying for jobs, and was asked by Racing Ahead magazine if I'd write a stables tour of Lucinda's yard. So I made an appointment to go and see her, and at the end of going through every horse and a bit about them, and me taking all sorts of notes, we got chatting. She said, "So what are you doing now?" And I mentioned that I'd been to another yard down in the south of England for a racing secretary job, but didn't get it because it was a flat yard and I was too heavy to ride out. And Lucinda just looked at me and said, "Do you want to be my secretary? I said, okay. And that was it. That was my interview. That was the job. So I went back to my parents in Liverpool, packed up my things, and
And off you went.
it was a few days later, and I got started. So
That's amazing. That is amazing. I love that kind of serendipity that just sometimes happens when you're in the right place at the right time, you know. And just backtracking to the you mentioned in passing the graduate training program there. Can you just talk us through a little bit about how you got into that? We touched on this slightly with Catch, but can you just tell us how that kind of came onto your radar, Sulekha, and when you realised that might be beneficial for you to have a go at?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is I can't quite remember. People have asked me this before, and I can only think I must have seen it online or been looking at careers in racing. You know, I just can't quite remember whether somebody had told me about it. But it was in my final year at university that I found out about it and put in an application, and went down to London for a selection day and was awarded a place and at my first choice placement at the Racing Post, which was great.
So you do get to give a selection, just for everybody else who might not know, like when you go into the graduate training program, how much say do you get over what you would like to do? Like, because I know obviously some people have more of an interest in the kind of bookmaking side, or they want to work on the more horse side, or in, you know, racing. And Catch obviously went to a training yard. Like, did you have a lot of control over what happens to you, or are you sort of placed more?
You had the opportunity to, I mean, the selection process may be slightly different now, because we're talking, what, 15 years ago, so not giving away my age, but so back then you made a short list of the 3 companies that you thought you would like to go and work for. So these companies sponsor your placement on the course and then within their business for anything from 6 to 8 weeks. There's no guarantee of a job at the end of it, but it's surprising how many graduates are offered a job at the end because they do so well. And the great thing this year is that the course isn't only open to graduates. It's open to anybody who can display sort of graduate level ability in their field and interest in getting into racing in, you know, some of the sort of I don't know, I say administrative roles, it's not right, but those roles that aren't being a jockey, you know, whereas I think we do have, you know, a lot of people think if you want to get into racing, you've got to be a jockey. Well, you know, we know that's not true. And I think it's great that you don't have to have gone to university now to get to take part in this course.
Yeah, I know. And actually, on meeting some of the people doing that, the graduate training program in 2020, I was fortunate enough to meet a few of them over the last few years. People's interests are varied and wide, and actually, you know, it's remarkable what backgrounds they come from and what their professional interests are and their personal interests too. And I'm always so deeply impressed by people's knowledge, and, you know, particularly if people have got massive knowledge about sort of form and breeding, and, you know, people who just have such a passion and such an interest, you know, which I think even if they haven't got a degree per se, their enthusiasm and their skills that they can bring to the industry are enormous anyway. So you went back to Lucinda's and spent a couple of years there. Can you just talk us through a little bit about your experience as a racing secretary? I think a lot of people who are in the industry will probably have a good grasp of the fact that the racing secretary, to me, is the heart of the yard and the person that you really need to be on side with. And it's definitely an amazingly wide and colourful job, I think. Can you just talk us through a little bit about what your responsibilities were there as a secretary and a bit about the job, Sulekha?
Yes, of course. So the beauty of me starting at Lucinda's was that she had never had a secretary before, and I'd never done the job before.
Wow.
So it actually meant that we could make the job what we wanted. It could be what Lucinda needed for the yard. It could utilize the skills that I had and the skills that I needed to learn. So up until then, Lucinda had been doing all the paperwork and administration for a 50-horse yard herself.
On her own?
Yeah, and used to be up till 2 a.m. doing invoicing and that kind of thing.
Oh my goodness.
It's helpful that her dad is a businessman and is very, very good with the accounts and the numbers, so he was a massive help to me as well.
Okay.
Especially when I took on things like invoicing that I'd never done before. But it was as much about getting to know the owners, communicating with them, letting them know what was happening with their horses, I used to send out emails every time anybody's horse was entered. It was booking the vet, being on the yard when the vet arrived, making sure there was somebody to hold the horse. I used to ride out a few lots in the morning as well. It was making entries, making declarations, checking headgear, making sure the staff knew which horses had to go where, putting horses in and out of training on the online system, which has moved on massively from what we were using back then. It was pretty basic software back then. Making sure vaccinations were kept up to date, making sure the farrier came in when we needed to, making sure that we had the right passports for the right horses, seeing horses arrive from all over, France and Ireland, making sure we got them into the yard, we quarantined them, we again got them vaccinated, all those kind of things. Name registrations, owner registrations,
You name it, you did
jockeys
it.
licenses.
Yeah.
For me, it was fantastic because it was just a perfect grounding in the sport, working at the coalface really, and learning a lot about the systems that keep the whole industry going. As simple as, I know what has to be done to register a new set of silks for an owner. And so if an owner rings me and says, oh, I've got a new horse and I want to run it, what happens? First thing I would say is you need to speak to your trainer, but at least I understand the process and have done through the various roles that I've had in the industry so far.
It's so powerful, that kind of knowledge from the ground up, isn't it? And actually, I think if you have, as you say, kind of been at the coalface, the understanding, the depth of understanding that you receive from a position like that just sets you off, particularly as your first job as well, Sulekha, just sets you off flying in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And even today, the knowledge that I gain there is hugely important, because it means that I can have a conversation with the trainer from a point of understanding what they are trying to achieve, in terms of how they're training the horses, what they want from the race course when they bring their horse to us. And same for the stable staff. I took horses to the races as a member of stable staff. So when I walk into a hostel at a race course, I know what they want to see, and I know what's not good enough, and I know what is. The food in the canteen, what's good enough, what's not. Well, I've lived it, I've been there. And so it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, definitely. And people value that when, particularly, when you're with the stable staff, for example, you mentioned there, like when you know, and they know that that improvement in your relationship, the conversation you can have, people know that you're not just the clerk of the course at Aintree, or in an elevated position like you are these days through sheer hard work and great skill, but you have that rapport with them, and you have that understanding of what their needs are and how you can help them, which is amazing when you reach a senior level.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's it exactly.
So progressing on from Lucinda's into the Jockey Club, which has now been your home on and off for a long time. How did you get into transitioning into thinking that being a trainee clerk and progressing on from there would be a good career path? Because I know Jockey Club, as a real nod to the Jockey Club, actually, they do a lot of development with young people, the traineeship for the clerks. There's obviously, you've come through the ranks, Jack Pryor, Dan Cooper is on the way now, like amazing people who they just really nurture and encourage, and have a very good track record of creating and training and teaching people in a really fantastic way. How did that position and that sort of opportunity come across you, and for you to think that would be a good one for you to take on?
I moved on from Lucinda Russell's to work for the Arabian Racing Organisation.
Oh yes, of course.
Initially as a racing executive, and then as racing manager. And it was through the work there that I was first asked to clerk the race meetings.
Okay.
And
they're based in Newbury Arrow, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I moved down there. I lived in Lambourne, which was fantastic fun.
Yeah.
As anybody who's been to Lambourne when they're in their 20s would know.
Yes, lived there for a while. Know all about it.
So the Arrow is or was back then. I refer to it as a traveling circus, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Yeah.
I mean that it literally, you would pack up the office each weekend through the summer and go to a different racecourse in the country, run a race meeting, pack up and come home. So
because it's an interesting little offshoot of racing, Arab racing, isn't it?
yeah, it is, and it's been a superb training ground for people in all sorts of racing professions, going on to become judges, stipendiary stewards.
Well, I
Obviously
know one of our
myself.
starters at the BHA started with doing Arab racing as well.
It's,
And,
I mean,
that was where he got his experience.
It's provided a huge opportunities for people, because it was largely an amateur sport. It is becoming more professional now. People could come in and make mistakes and not get into trouble, and that goes for jockeys as well. I remember a young jockey who I won't share his name because I won't embarrass him if he is listening. I doubt it, but if he is, who rode a finisher circuit too early at Wolverhampton. But rather than, he learned his lesson there rather than doing it under rules where there were, people betting on his horse and everything. Whereas Arrow, there's not as much money staked on these meetings back then, and it was a very tight community as well. It was good fun. But that was where I first started acting as clerk of the course. And was actually Clark's the very first flat meeting ever run at Foslas, because that was actually an Arab meeting.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so that's
amazing.
In those days there was they still hadn't put the lift in up to the steward's box up at the top of the stands, so it was up and down the stairs several times during the day. It was hard going. But so the experience of clerking through Arrow was what made me think, actually I quite fancy this as a career. And I learned a little bit more about it. I shadowed clerks like Fiona Needham. I actually shadowed her on the day Cheltenham was abandoned due to high winds. So it was probably the one day she really didn't need me trotting around after, when she was clerking at Huntingdon, and there were coach loads of people rerouting from Cheltenham to Huntingdon instead, in the hope the racing was on there. So I actually ended up answering the phone in the office for some of the day as well, just helping out as best you can.
All hands on deck. Okay.
So, and then from there, the Jockey Club advertised a trainee clerk position, which the Jockey Club's policy in recent years has been to always have a trainee clerk coming through the system, because there's enough race meetings within the group that once they're qualified, they can go and help at the big festivals and the big meetings. There's so many fixtures at the likes of Kempton that it gives Barney Clifford a few days off if somebody else goes and covers for him. So the Jockey Club generally have a trainee clerk in the system at most of the time. So I went for 2 rounds of interviews, one in London, one at Warwick Racecourse, not really knowing what to expect, not really knowing what to prepare, but actually really enjoyed the interviews. Felt like I was talking to like-minded people about shared interests and shared enthusiasm about racing and about the sport, and was offered the job.
So what sort of things, when you go to an interview, for anyone that might be interested in this as a young person in the industry, what sort of things are they looking for in a trainee clerk, do you think, Sulekha, if you were thinking about that as a career?
I think ability to communicate with people at all levels. So, people from Lord somebody who might be steward for the day, or might be an owner with 30 people in a box who's paid top in dollar for it, right through to the farrier, being able to communicate with your vets. Do you have, if they come and say to you, something's happened to this horse, do you understand what they're saying to you? Understanding, I think, showing an understanding of the various roles involved in bringing a race day together. I always describe the clerk's role as being the conductor of the orchestra. You're not playing any of the instruments. You're putting the right players in there to play the instruments for you. What you're doing is making sure that everybody's playing at the right time.
Great analogy. Great. I'm going to use that one. Yeah. Okay.
But it is exactly what you're doing, and most of the time you can just sit back and it will happen. But when you have to step in is when the incidents happen, when things start to go wrong, and you have to direct people in the right way and make sure that the right areas are covered at the right times. That's what the role, in my mind, entails, or certainly the race day role. There's more to it in terms of the turf management side, and also the race planning side. They're the sort of three areas that the clerk takes control of on a race course. So the turf management, I believe, is always something that can be learned as long as you have some interest in sort of high school level science. Yeah, it is. and you know, a lot of you go and do an advanced groundsman's course usually as part of your clerk's training, and it is sort of GCSE moving towards A level kind of science, so it's very doable for most people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was lucky enough actually to go and spend a couple of days on the groundsman's course with Richard Lindley, and just meeting ground staff and trainee clerks there as well was brilliant, and just chatting away to people, and just, you know, I spent a lot of time in Newmarket on the gallops, and actually then having a completely different understanding, standing on the gallops, digging up the turf, looking at soil and grass and things, you know, gives you like a completely fresh perspective. And just walking the courses and, you know, spending time walking courses with the course inspectors and the clerks, I just think is a fascinating insight. I've been really, really fortunate to be able to do that. Lots of people don't have that option, but it's an amazing, I would urge anyone who ever gets the chance to do that, if you are at a race meeting and you get an option, to go and do that, because it is, you might think that looking at grass is a bit boring, but actually every racetrack is so different. And the other thing I think is lovely to get an appreciation of is that what you see on the television is so different to what you see when you actually walk a course, you know, with regard to the camber and the rises and everything else around the ground is just so different up close, I think.
I think it's also remembering that you're working with nature. You're not working with something that always does exactly what you think it's going to do all of the time. You know, and nature catches all of us out with all sorts of things all of the time, and race courses are no different in that sense. So you learn to expect the unexpected to an extent, but also when you're talking about walking the course, I think it also gives you an appreciation of the skill and abilities of our ground staff that, you know, that work on our race courses. They're hugely talented and hardworking individuals, and it's a very rewarding career for people. I think, you know, this is a women in racing presentation or conversation, and I do quite strongly feel we don't have enough women represented in the ground staff side of things. I'd love to see more women coming through.
I can't think of a single one actually, Sulekha.
There are a few. We actually have a female greenkeeper, senior greenkeeper at Aintree, but she does come and help on the racecourse side as well, and has worked at Carlisle Racecourse as well. I believe there certainly used to be a female member of ground staff at Wolverhampton as well. Working within arena racing. So there are a few, but certainly not enough. I'd love to see more women coming through.
I have to say, some of the ground staff, I would definitely give a nod to Alan at Newmarket. It's one of my favourite people in the world. And, you know, there's a lot of people with extremely good senses of humour, you know, very sharp and really on the ball, and like you say, just so skilled at what they do. And I think often they go sort of silently in the background, don't they? But, you know, you'll know yourself, preparing for a big meeting, the ground staff are just the crux, they're the heartbeat of getting a meeting on often.
Yeah, and the other thing you've got to remember is during racing, you know, if you're a greenkeeper on a golf course, you don't really, you'll see the players going past you, but you're not that involved in the sport. In racing, you're out there, you're catching loose horses, you're driving around in a vehicle with screens, you're holding the screens up, you're putting bypasses in place, you're briefing the staff who come in on the day to make sure they know what they're doing. You're replacing broken hurdles, you're repairing the fences in between races, you know, you're moving rail. So it's a very, very involved job. You know, you're right in the heart of the sport, which I don't think groundsmanship in any other sport gives you quite that sort of closeness to the actual sport and the competitors.
Definitely. And I know when we talk about kind of situation management, often the ground staff would be the person that will be the incident manager, because they're the primary liaison for the clerk of the course in that situation. Because if there are vets or doctors or whoever else involved, they're doing their job, and actually the ground staff are the ones that are in charge of the communication and making sure everything's sorted out, and actually their role is so pivotal. So I think that's an amazing insight, Sulekha, and I think probably one that a lot of people wouldn't think about. But in terms of encouraging women into the industry, it's a much forgotten role that I think is really worth a highlight. And so you've obviously progressed through quite a few different race courses within the Jockey Club initially before you went to Hamilton. How does it work with kind of moving up and around? Like, what's the sort of progression, and how does that work? Is that a set ladder within the Jockey Club, or is it just sort of what's coming up at the time?
No, I think a little bit of it depends on how long it takes you for you to do your training, and what jobs are available when you get to the end of your training. As it was, I started training in October 2009. By January 2010, I was already running things at Market Race and Nottingham racecourses, even though I wasn't quite qualified. I then qualified in the March. Now, 6 months is quite a short time to get through your Clerk's training, but I was sort of sped through it a little bit because they needed a qualified clerk to run the 2 courses, because Nick Patton had got the job as head of Jockey Club Estates. And also the experience I already had from the Arabian racing was actually so relevant to the clerk's training that you're expected to do to be a clerk under rules, that actually I got through it quite quickly. So that then I went to Market Race in Nottingham. That was the job that was available. I still had to interview for it, but I was offered the role. After 2 years there, Andrew Morris was offered the job at Chester and Bangor racecourses, which meant that Warwick and Huntingdon racecourses were going looking for a new clerk. And at that time, there wasn't actually a trainee clerk in the system, because no one had really expected people to leave quite so quickly. So I applied for Warwick and Huntingdon largely because of the quality of racing that they run. You know, Warwick has had at the time a grade 2 Kingmaker Novices Chase, which was run just the other day, and also the Classic Chase, and also then the Peterborough Chase at Huntingdon. So I wanted to be involved at that higher level. So I secured that job and spent 4 years at those 2 tracks before applying to move up to Glasgow to join the team at Hamilton Park.
I'm just going to take a little interjection. We've had a question come in. For anyone who's listening, do pop your questions either in the chat or the Q&A. I am monitoring that as well. I've had a question from Rachel. For those of us who've come from a non-racing background, how would you recommend broadening knowledge and opportunities in racing? Are there any specific courses or experiences that you would recommend?
Yes, everything. In terms of courses, I think the racing industry course, the Trick course it's known as, is very, very good to give you a basic overview and broad understanding of racing. Obviously, I don't know quite what's happening with these courses at the moment, whether they're running virtually or not, but certainly when they are up and running again, I'd strongly recommend that one. We've already talked about the BHA development program, which is now open to non-graduates as well as graduates. So that's another great course. But I would think in normal times, don't be afraid to speak to people. Don't be afraid to, drop somebody an email to say, I'm really interested in this. Could I come and visit and have a look? I found, and I use the same mentality with people who come to me. A lot of people help me to get to where I am. A lot of people gave me their time, told me about what they do, showed me what they do, let me do work experience. And I appreciate it's not so easy at the moment because you can't just go and visit people. But hopefully in the not too distant future, there would be the opportunity for people to come, walk the course with the clerk, show an interest, network. I think that is hugely important. Get yourself to the race course, try and spot what jobs people are doing. That was one of the things that got me into clerking, was seeing Anthea Mooreshead at Perth Racecourse years ago. And it didn't really register with me at the time, but I saw her in the parade ring organising people and sort of shuffling people about with a radio. And I looked at her and I thought, I wonder who she is, I wonder what she's doing. And it wasn't until later that it registered with me that must have been something of a trigger for me to then think about becoming a clerk of the course. So I would say just grab every opportunity and chat to everybody. There's very few people in the racing industry who will turn you away.
Yeah.
And if they do, then just be brave and try someone else.
Definitely. I think that's such great advice, Sulekha. Like I would wholeheartedly agree with that definitely use the Women in Racing Network as well. I think there's lots of people out there who are members of this, and obviously in normal times we can meet up and people can network face to face, but at the moment, you know, don't be afraid. If you are looking for an opportunity to email us at the committee, we can help you. And if you don't know somebody in Women in Racing who you think might be of interest, just email us and we can certainly put you in touch with the right people. And if there isn't anyone within Women in Racing, I can guarantee that there'll be somebody who knows somebody who can help you. So certainly there's an amazing wealth of knowledge in the industry and people are genuinely really willing to help. I know I take people out with me on course in non-COVID times, and you know I love having people come around, you know, with the vets, and it's brilliant. So definitely don't be afraid. Tallulah has actually just popped a note up to say the BHA graduate program is now taking applications. It closes the 22nd of February. The BRS, so the racing school, are also looking to run courses online. There is also the Racing to Learn platform from the BHA, which has a lot of different courses on it. Might be worth having a look there. Next question before we pick up about Hamilton and then Aintree. Oh my goodness, they're flooding in. We'll go questions for a minute and then we'll pick up again. Quick question. Do you think women are underrepresented as clerks of the course?
Actually, no, I don't. I think maybe 20 years ago they were, but I think now there's quite a few of us about. At one point in Scotland, every single clerk was female. Until Emma Marley moved to work for the BHA. But no, I think clerking is one area where women really have broken through. I don't think anybody bats an eyelid at a female clerk on course anymore at all. I mean, when I got the traineeship, there was not one individual, now departed, who was introduced to me on my first day racing at Haydock and looked at my mentor and didn't even look at me and just said, "Couldn't you find a boy?" And I thought, oh, right, okay, what am I coming into? But actually, you know what, that's the only time I've come across it. And that was one person who as I say, has now departed and was pretty elderly at the time. And I think it was just a different way of thinking. But, you know, the clerks of the course were men and that was it. And I very much don't think that's the case now.
There's definitely plenty of good women out there. Another one from Jane here. Would Sulekha be interested in clerking at any of the international race courses? And if so, which ones would you choose?
Oh, wow.
Great question. That is a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. You know what? I'd love to spend more time racing internationally. I haven't done a lot of it. I've been racing in Bangalore, in India, which was an eye-opener. And the guys, the clerk of the course there and the head groundsman, fantastic. They invited me back the next day to walk the course and all sorts and to give some advice. And so I had a brilliant time there. But Bangalore isn't a place I could live personally. It's just too hectic for me. I'd love to go to Australia. I'd love to see racing out there. But the irony is the clerk of the course's role in Australia is a totally different thing. My understanding is that what a clerk of the course does here is what a track manager does in Australia. Yeah. So if you say to somebody from Australian racing, you're a clerk of the course, they think you're the person on the back of the horse that goes and catches all the loose ones. You know, and flies along at 40 miles an hour, catching the ones that have broken out the stalls and things, which it was definitely. I had a group of Australian racegoers come racing at Warwick, and they got in touch in advance and asked if I'd give them a bit of a tour and a talk through, you know, how things work in the UK, and then they were going on to Cheltenham afterwards. And they actually brought I can't remember his name. They brought an Australian jump jockey with them who had a ride at Warwick. And when I said to them, I'm the clerk of the course, I got this totally bizarre look. And I couldn't really understand why until the guy leading the tour said, oh, no, she's the track manager. She's the track manager. And they all went, oh, okay.
I always think they're amazed. So I worked in Australia for a few years and was fortunate to go back fairly recently, but I think they're always amazed that we don't have clerks at every race course, because
but actually at Aintree we do.
Yes, I know, and there are, Fakenham, they usually have them when the Hunt are available, and there's a few other courses as well, but they're amazed that we don't have them at every race week as a routine, because they're like, well, how do you catch a horse? And it's like, the people catch it, and they're like, really? Oh my God, that's ridiculous. And actually, when you get into those conversations, you think, oh, it does make sense. And actually, of course, at Aintree, they're brilliant, aren't they? And
I mean, they're great for bringing loose horses back calmly and without them getting, because you know what it's like if you're hanging on to the end of a horse who's just pulled up in a race and is still pretty full of adrenaline. It's much easier if you're on the back of a horse. So they're great at Aintree.
Or you have a situation, we had one a few weeks ago where it did 6 laps of the track before anyone managed to catch it. Everyone was standing there like, again? Oh no, he's going again. So yeah. Okay. So just pressing on from Warwick and Huntingdon, you returned up to north of the border. Hamilton Park is a beautiful racecourse. I was fortunate to go to university in Scotland. Lovely place up there. It's not a track that lots of people will have been to. Can you just tell us a little bit about Hamilton? I know it's absolutely stunning, and it's probably I think as an English person, is a very underrated racecourse that not many people from here might necessarily go and visit. But Hamilton and Perth, both absolutely stunning venues. Can you just tell us a little bit about Hamilton, Sulekha, and your work there? Because you moved into more of a kind of managemental role there as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so my role there was as it was racing manager and clerk of the course. And I mean, Hamilton, I think, is a hidden gem. The stands, when I lived in Hamilton, I sort of played tennis locally and made friends in the area. The number of people who say to me, I had no idea it's there. Where is the racecourse? But you go through those gates and suddenly it opens into this beautiful parkland. From the top of the stands, you can see right out over towards the hills. You'd see for miles, and it's a very fair track. Trainers love running horses there because of the uphill finish, because it's a nice way for a horse to run. To finish a race uphill, they always feel that it's incredibly fair, and it's a very fun track. They pride themselves on giving everybody a really good day out or a good night out, and Hamilton Park was the pioneer of the evening meeting. And they've made a real thing of it. Locally, evening racing there is huge, and it's just it's very sad that they've not been able to have their crowds recently, because the small independent race courses, and I know Vivian, the chief exec, would tie me up for saying that it's a small course, because it's not. She always says it's a very successful business, but they've had it incredibly tough. For those courses who are part of a bigger organization, it's slightly different, but the small courses at the moment some of them are really suffering. So and Hamilton Park without crowds is just really sad, I think. I think it's really upsetting. So I mean, I was really pleased that the Scottish government allowed them to run most of their fixtures this year, and the same for the other Scottish courses. But no, to go back to my role at Hamilton Park, the reason for me wanting to move there was to further my own experience in the sort of wider running of a racecourse business. When you're at an independent racecourse, you only have each other to rely on. You're not, decisions aren't made at a head office that are then fed down, or you don't, other than speaking to Vivian and then the board above her. If there's something we want to do and everybody agrees to it, we do it. And it's on everybody's head as to whether it's successful or not. And working in that way was it was a new thing for me to be working for such a small company in terms of headcount, but such an ambitious company as well. And that was what was so exciting, is that there was a real opportunity. The board were keen to see prize money improve. So my first year there, I was told, right, we want to get prize money above £1 million. So I could, I had free rein to write the best race program I could with that money. I made trips to Ireland, to Yorkshire, down to Lambourne to visit trainers, to encourage them to bring their horses to Hamilton Park and convince them that it's actually not as far as it seems, because it's not, because you're just off the motorway. So it was 4 very, very enjoyable years for me, and ones in which I learned a huge amount, and that set me up ready for when the job came up at Aintree.
It's fascinating insight, that, Sulekha, because I think there's lots of advantages to working for a bigger organisation like the Jockey Club, but actually that the decision making, that, like you say, being right there when you're in a smaller independent business and having access to, I mean, Vivian is a powerhouse. She's so inspirational, isn't she? And, you know, having someone like her on your team to learn from as a businesswoman is an incredible opportunity. I mean, I've only met her a couple of times, but I've just been so impressed by her. And, you know, she, I imagine, had a lot of insight to give you and a lot to teach you as well.
Oh yeah, and as I said, that was one of the drivers for me to go into that job, because I'd done 6 years at small courses with the Jockey Club, and it was, for me, it was fairly clear that nobody on the large courses was going to be moving on anytime soon. So I had to think about how I wanted to continue to develop and learn and better myself, and it was just the perfect opportunity.
And were you quite strategic about that? Like, had you identified, I need or want to go to a smaller independent course to upskill in certain business areas in order to progress? Or was it a kind of opportunistic thing that the job at Hamilton came up? Like, was that a job move that you'd kind of planned a little bit or thought about in advance?
I think when I saw the job advertised, I saw the opportunity to do that. Yeah. I'm not sure I necessarily was sat there waiting for that opportunity to come along and thinking this is what I need. But when I saw it advertised, I thought actually that could be the right next step. And the thing is, you know, we were talking about interviews earlier. Going to an interview is as much about the person being interviewed learning about the company that they've applied for a job at and deciding if you want to go and work for them, as it is the other way around. And so actually, much like my interviews for the trainee clerk, I really enjoyed chatting to Vivian during the interview. And when I then met the chairman as well, I really enjoyed speaking to him. And I came away thinking, actually, I hope they offer me this job, because these are people I can work with. Yeah. There have been, you know, along the way, other job interviews I've gone for in and out of racing that I've thought, actually, no, not for me. Just, you know, even if they offer it to me, it's not the right fit. And I think that's often something people forget, is that interviews go both ways. It's as much about you learning whether you want to come into this role and you want to do the job and work with the people who are interviewing you, as them deciding if they want you or not.
Yeah, I think that's so true. So true. Because actually sometimes it's just, like you say, not a good fit. And the other thing, the phrase I love is people work with people they like. And, you know, that's how business works best, isn't it? When everybody actually gets on with one another, which is not to say that you can't be successful if you don't, but it's a much nicer kind of fit if everybody does. Just before we get on to Aintree, interesting question here. What wet weather clothing brands, especially coats and boots, do you recommend as being the best for keeping warm and dry? Big problem when you're the clerk of the course.
So, my first coat when I started as a clerk was a North Face one, which was excellent. Okay. For a long time. Shall we say I rather grew out of it. But it was a bit smaller back then in my 20s. So that one actually didn't go in the bin that long ago, but it was very good. Now I can't remember the brand, but the waterproof trousers I wear are actually fishing over trousers that I got from a country store up in Scotland. Okay. And I got them a couple of years ago, and they haven't let me down yet. And I've been through so many pairs of waterproofs before that and found they just don't cut it. And if the person asking wants to get in touch, I will have a look in my car and let you know what brand they are.
I would definitely give Jane Headley the nod for largest hat collection for wet weather. course. She seems to have a hat for every occasion and has given me tips on how to protect my hats to make sure that they keep being warm and dry. She is the woman for a good hat. Yeah, cool. So off we went to Aintree, and deep excitement, I think, for a lot of, certainly women in racing and just in general, to see people were genuinely pleased in the industry, I think, for you to see you being promoted to be the clerk at Aintree and the head of racing in the Northwest. What a thrill for you. Like, that must have been an amazing day when you got that job.
Yeah, it was. It's a slightly strange one at Aintree because I've been involved there for over 10 years. I'd been going to help at Aintree since I was a trainee clerk with the Jockey Club. So it was, funny enough, it was something my cousin mentioned to me when she went for a job interview recently, and we were talking about being interviewed by people who already know you, and how challenging that can be. And it was like that. You know, my first interview was at head office in High Holborn, and I was sitting in a room with people who already knew me. So you're sort of deciding, well, how do I sell myself when they know, you know, they already, you don't want to assume that they know everything, but they do already know you quite well. So that was quite a challenge through the process. And I think actually my second interview was a little bit easier because Rose Patterson was the chairman and was in my second interview, and I had a lovely time chatting to her. She was very, very strong on equine welfare and community. And those are two areas. Community was one of the things I'd been leading on at Hamilton Park anyway. And obviously equine welfare is so important to everything that happens at Aintree. And I had already been at the heart of a lot of the developments that had been made in equine welfare over the years, and in being involved in organising and running the new washdown area, to briefing the ground staff on bypasses and screens when things were changed. And so there's a lot of it I'd already been exposed to, so I was in quite a strong position anyway. But you never go into these things feeling confident. It was something a previous manager said to me a good few years ago, that when you go for a promotion, you never really feel like you're ready for it. You know, it's almost other people who decide whether you're ready or not. Because you were always going to be moving out of your comfort zone when you're stepping up another level. And you are therefore going to feel uncomfortable. And that it's these other people who are almost deciding whether they think you're ready for the next step. So that was sort of how I felt that interview went, and it was a case of just waiting and seeing it. And you know, the nature of British horse racing is such that there was, you know, people ringing me telling me I'd got the job before I'd even been offered it and that kind of thing. But as it was, I was offered the job, and I was absolutely over the moon. And first thing I did was ring my parents. And the second thing I did was go and tell Vivian, because I was in the office at Hamilton Park that day, and she knew I'd been for the interview, and she was incredibly supportive. So, and that was, it sort of went from there.
So, I mean, it's a bit of an understatement to say that circumstances have been challenging since you took the job on. Obviously, last year didn't quite go according to your plan for your first year in the job. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the sort of experiences initially when you started the job, and then obviously how things have panned out with the pandemic? Because I mean, like, total nightmare, obviously, but and how that's kind of moving on into plans for this year, because, you know, we are heading towards the Grand National, and, you know, all being well, obviously the racing is going to be on with or without crowds, who knows. But just chat to us a little bit about your experiences in the job so far. One or two people may have a few questions specifically about Aintree and the Grand National. So if you've got anything burning you want to ask, we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left, so we can definitely cram in a few more. But yeah, go for it, Sulekha, that'd be lovely.
Well, when I started in the role, I was sort of parachuted into it mid preparations for the Grand National. So there was a lot had already been done. There's a lot that hadn't been done. And my first challenge was to figure out what hadn't yet been done and what still needed doing over the. I mean, I started mid-December.
Okay.
I was released from my job at Hamilton Park a little bit early, and split my time between the two jobs for a couple of months before starting officially at Aintree at the start of February. thankfully the outgoing clerk of the course, Andrew Tulloch, did come into Aintree a few times to do a handover with me, and that was really valuable, just getting me up to speed on what jobs still needed to be done. And the sort of the behind the scenes things, like writing and sending out the letters to owners with entries, and the owners with needing their car passes, and those kind of things that nobody the owner gets their letter, but they've no idea who sent it or how it's been done. So all that kind of thing, just getting to grips. Branding, making sure we have enough Randox stickers to go on the jockeys' breeches, those kind of things that even I hadn't thought about, to be honest. So it was hitting the ground running, really straight into it, along with getting to know the ground staff. They're a fairly new team at the time. There'd been a restructure, so there were quite a lot of new faces, so getting to know them, making sure that everything was going well on the track. The good thing being that the head groundsman at Aintree has been there a long time and knows what needs to be done, and is fairly confident on his sort of timescales and things. So a lot of that, even now, I can leave him to run the day-to-day things. I don't need to be diving in there every day finding out exactly what he's doing. And then it all sort of ground to a halt. Cheltenham happened, and Cheltenham is, if you're not at Cheltenham and you work in racing, you'll discover that Cheltenham is a great week to get things done. Because nobody sends emails, nobody rings you, you don't get anything, so you can just get all these things, all these jobs out of the way, and have the racing on in the background. So I made the most of that week. And of course, by this point, there were rumblings about racing stopping and what was going to happen, and we were looking at different scenarios for the Grand National of effectively what we now know is behind closed doors racing. But at the time, we were just trying to see how we could get it to as few people on site as possible. Who is essential, who isn't, even including numbers of stable staff, can we run it with 500 people on site? Can we do it safely? And all these kind of discussions were ongoing. And then we'd all sort of been told to try and stop going into the office. So we were all working from home a little bit more. I moved house in between all of this one weekend. And then on the Monday after I moved house, I was sat at home, and a text message came through just saying, just a heads up, we're about to cancel. And that was it. And the plug was pulled. And the next few days were spent making sure that everybody knew, everybody that we'd sort of booked, and from doctors, vets, farriers, ambulance providers, all those people, letting them know that we weren't going to need their services. Most people had heard anyway, because it was all over the news. And then it all went very quiet. We just sort of all sat there and went, oh, okay.
It was a good bit of thumb twiddling for a couple of months.
Yeah,
wasn't there?
and then not long after, racing stopped completely. Yeah. And then the sort of furlough system kicked in, and it was a case of deciding which ground. We took our ground staff teams down to minimum numbers to see the course through the summer when we weren't racing, knowing that we weren't going to be racing again till October, because our spring fixtures were lost as well. So there was a lot of working through that with the HR department, and breaking the news to the staff, some of the staff, that we were putting them on furlough, and assuring them that this wasn't them losing their job, because it's a scary thing for someone to be told all of a sudden that we don't need you to come to work anymore.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it, how now, nearly a year on, this whole concept of going on furlough has become very normal. But actually, at the time, there was so much uncertainty around what is going to happen, and now everyone's like, oh yeah, I've been furloughed for a few weeks.
We all keep using the phrase the new normal, and that's another part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So we're all speed ahead for this year, though, which is exciting. Yes. How's this year shaping up, and what are you sort of doing day to day at the moment in preparation?
Day to day is all sorts of things, from sorting out branding, stable staff and jockeys' coats, breeches, arranging overflow weighing rooms, changing rooms, because obviously we can't, jockeys normally all bundle into one changing room. We can't do that, so we're actually going to be running 3/4 different changing rooms to get, because we're up to 70 or 80 jockeys by the Saturday usually, especially if amateurs are back riding by then. So having the space for everybody to social distance and still have their own changing space and things is challenging. So we've been working on that. We've been working on how the green zone's going to operate, how we're going to accommodate those coming over from Ireland, because they're actually going to have to be in completely separate accommodation and a separate area of the stable yard. So we've been busy arranging that. It's all just COVID, it's COVID precautions, so that they're not the risk of them mixing with the British community is as slim as possible.
I feel like every nook and cranny of a grandstand and a racecourse has a half-naked jockey in it at the moment, because there's just weighing rooms everywhere.
You take a wrong turn on a racecourse and you get a shock at the moment. Certainly.
Absolutely, gosh, it's crazy.
And then beyond that, we're still working towards various scenarios where we very much hope we'll have owners back on course, but we don't know. It would be nice if we could even have some spectators back on course, but we don't know. So we're still having to plan for those eventualities without actually knowing what event we're going to be running come April. So there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of discussing. Every so often somebody throws a curveball saying, have you remembered you need to provide this? And there's a lot of sort of shuffling around and okay, which room can we put that in? Where are we going to do, how are we going to house everybody? So it's a very, very different build up to what we were seeing last year, even before COVID hit the headlines. We still don't quite know we have an idea, but we don't quite know what we're preparing for. But let's make sure we run the race. That's the main bit as far as I'm concerned. Let's run the 3 days racing.
Definitely. Well, Sulekha, queen of logistics of plan A to Z. I think we've covered a lot. If anyone else has a final question, just stick it up quickly. Otherwise, I was just going to finish by just talking about the Grand National. Do you have like a particularly memorable running of the Grand National that sticks in your mind? Even before you worked there or you've been involved with the Jockey Club, is there a particular horse or a particular race that really stands out for you?
Probably the first one I ever watched, which it didn't really register with me at the time. I was only 9 years old and we were in Dublin. Dad was at a conference and Mum and I had gone with him to back in the day what was called the Wives Programme at a conference, which quite clearly it would not be called now, and I'm still shocked it was called that back then. But Mum and I took part in the social programme, which we were in this hotel room, and it was Minnie Homer won the Grand National, and I sat and watched it because it was horses, not because it was racing or because it was the Grand National, but it really stuck with me. And then later on that same trip, we went to the Irish National Stud. And as anybody who's been to a stud knows, the one thing you don't do is go up and pat the stallions. Well, 9-year-old me saw this lovely chestnut stallion stood there, and the first thing I said to the person showing us around was, "Can I pat him?" And they sort of looked at me and went, "No, go on then." So there's a great photo of me at the age of 9 patting this enormous stallion. I can't remember his name. I just remember he was chestnut. And it was, those kind of memories stick with you. But that's my first memory of the Grand National, and probably for me the most formative one.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed for this year. We'll really look forward to it. I know lots of people in racing have a real love for the Grand National, and I know that everybody involved in women in racing wishes you the very best of luck. However it pans out, whether there's just a few people or a lot of people, as long as they're the horses, as like you say, then the race will go ahead. And we all wish you the very, very best, Sulekha. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a fantastic chat. I'm sure everyone else will agree. If there are any follow-up questions, do send them over to us, and we will forward them on to Sulekha. If you want any advice about clerking or anything else about careers, then do just drop us a line. All our details are on the Women in Racing website. This interview will be up there shortly, so if there's anyone else that would like to watch it, then do just let them know. Tallulah posts them all to the website, and they are on our YouTube channel. Sulekha, thank you, and good night everybody. We will see you again soon. Cheers guys. Thank you.
Thank you.